The Letter That Made Cromwell Dangerous, Chapter 1. The Man Nobody Feared Yet. In the autumn of 1642, Oliver Cromwell is nobody in particular. This is not false modesty. It is the plain administrative fact of his situation. He is 43 years old, Member of Parliament for Cambridge, a gentleman farmer of middling estate whose most recent distinction is having arrived at the outbreak of war with a small troop of horse he has recruited, equipped, and paid for largely himself. He has no military experience worth the name. He has never commanded men in the field. He has read some military theory, spoken with some veterans, and arrived at certain conclusions that he has not yet had occasion to test. He is at this point one of several hundred men on the parliamentary side who have done roughly the same thing. The war will dispose of most of them quickly and without ceremony. The ones who survive will be the ones who learn fastest. Cromwell learns very fast. His first engagement, a skirmish at Grantham in May 1643, his cavalry charging uphill against a royalist force of superior numbers and routing them with a completeness that surprises everyone, including apparently Cromwell himself, produces a letter to his superiors that is worth examining closely, not for its military content, which is straightforward, but for its tone. Most cavalry commanders writing after a successful engagement produce dispatches flavoured with professional satisfaction, modest pride, the careful self-presentation of men building a reputation. Cromwell writes as though God has just confirmed something he already suspected. "God hath given us this evening a notable victory," he writes, with a directness that sits oddly between the conventional religious formula of the period and something rather more personally felt. The victory is God's, but the arrangement by which God delivered it, the trained horses, the disciplined men, the charge uphill against the odds, these are Cromwell's. He is beginning to understand something about the relationship between divine providence and human preparation, and the letter shows him working it out in real time. Chapter 2. The Letter. It arrives in the summer of 1643, addressed to his cousin Colonel Valentine Walton, whose son has just died at the Battle of Gainsborough, died well, as soldiers' deaths go, at the head of his troop, quickly, in the middle of the action, rather than on a surgeon's table afterward. Cromwell is writing to tell a father that his son is dead. This is among the oldest and worst of all military duties, and Cromwell performs it with a care and a candour that reveals, more clearly than any battle dispatch, the quality of the mind that is becoming, quite quietly, the most dangerous in England. He does not begin with comfort. He begins with the facts, the battle, the charge, the manner of the death, the precise location and circumstance, with the attention to detail of a man who understands that a father's grief requires something more solid than consolation to anchor itself to. He tells Walton that his son died, a sweet young man, a precious young man. He tells him that the death was so full of glory that it was not to be lamented. Then he writes the sentence that has been studied and quoted and argued over ever since. "Sir, you know my own trials this way, but I desire this to be the comfort to you and yours, that the Lord himself will be their comforter." He is not offering himself as comforter. He is offering God, specifically, directly, without the mediating apparatus of church or sacrament or episcopal hierarchy that Charles has spent 13 years trying to impose on a kingdom that doesn't want it. The comfort is available directly, personally, without institution. Walton need not go through anyone to receive it. This is not a revolutionary theological statement, it is standard Puritan doctrine, the spiritual common currency of the parliamentary cause. What makes it remarkable is the utter absence of qualification, the complete personal certainty with which it is delivered. Cromwell is not suggesting that God might comfort Walton, or hoping that God will, or praying that God does. He is stating it as fact, with the confidence of a man who has tested the proposition himself, "You know my own trials this way," and found it reliable. He knows because he has been there. He has had his own darkness, the years in the 1630s of what he described to his physician as a period of near total spiritual collapse, the sense of damnation, the sleepless nights, the physical symptoms of a man whose inner architecture is undergoing reconstruction at some cost. He has come through it. He knows from the inside what is on the other side. This is why the letter works. This is why it travels, copied and recopied through the parliamentary networks of East Anglia and beyond. It is not a great general writing about tactics. It is a man writing about something he knows in the way that only experience rather than theory produces knowledge, and the knowledge is the kind that frightens people in authority. Because a man who believes God has already confirmed his election, who has tested the proposition in his own darkness and found it solid, is not susceptible to the usual instruments of social control. He cannot be threatened with damnation, he cannot be bribed with preferment, he cannot be managed with the careful distribution of honour and status that keeps most ambitious men navigable. He can only be stopped. And stopping him, as the next several years will demonstrate, is not straightforward. Chapter 3. What the letter made possible. Cromwell's cavalry is, by 1644, the best in England. This is not an accident. Most cavalry of the period is raised, trained, and commanded according to a model that treats social hierarchy as a military principle. Gentlemen command, their social inferiors follow, and the relationship between the two replicates the relationship between any landowner and his tenants. This produces cavalry that is, at its best, brave, and at its worst, ungovernable. Rupert's horse at Edgehill being the most instructive example, brilliant in the charge, impossible to recall, gone for 2 hours while the battle turned. Cromwell does something different. He recruits, famously and controversially, on a basis that has nothing to do with birth and everything to do with what he calls godly quality. Men of religious conviction, men who understand what they are fighting for, men who will not break under pressure because they believe, with the totality of the converted, that they are doing God's work. He writes to one of his recruiting officers in 1643, in a letter that causes considerable parliamentary eyebrow-raising, "I had rather have a plain russet-coated captain that knows what he fights for and loves what he knows, than that which you call a gentleman and is nothing else." The eyebrows are not wrong to raise themselves. This is a genuinely radical statement, not in its theology, which is unremarkable, but in its practical implications. Cromwell is proposing to organize military authority around conviction rather than birth, to create a command structure whose legitimacy derives not from social position, but from demonstrated quality of belief and proven effectiveness in the field. He is, in other words, prototyping the new model army 4 years before Parliament officially creates it. The results at Marston Moor in July 1644 are conclusive. Cromwell's cavalry, the Ironsides, as Rupert calls them, in a tribute he probably regrets, break the royalist horse on the left flank, and then, unlike Rupert at Edgehill, stop, turn, come back. The horses are controlled. The men are disciplined. They wheel and strike the royalist infantry in the flank, and the battle, which had been going badly enough for the parliamentary cause that some on the field believe it lost, turns in the space of an hour into the most complete parliamentary victory of the war. 3,000 royalists dead, the north gone, Newcastle fallen. Cromwell writes to the Speaker of the House of Commons that evening, "God made them as stubble to our swords." The phrasing is not humility. It is something more precise, the statement of a man who has watched his hypothesis confirmed again in blood and smoke, and is noting the result with the quiet satisfaction of an experimenter whose prediction has held. Chapter 4. The Fear. The fear begins in the parliamentary coalition sometime in 1644. It is not yet the fear of an enemy. It is the more complicated and in some ways more debilitating fear of an ally. The men who run Parliament, the lawyers, the Presbyterian ministers, the great merchants, the cautious constitutionalists who began this war to restore the proper balance between king and Parliament and have no more interest in revolution than they have in flying, these men look at Cromwell and see something they did not order and cannot entirely control. A general who wins battles is useful. A general who wins battles because he believes God is personally directing the outcome is something else. A general who wins battles, believes in direct divine sanction, and has demonstrated a willingness to recruit on the basis of conviction rather than birth is, to the Presbyterian mind, a problem of considerable dimensions. The Scots are more explicit about it. Their commissioners in London, watching Cromwell's rise with the professional alarm of men who have backed Parliament in exchange for Presbyterian church settlement in England, are quite clear. This man, if he continues, will make religious toleration into a military principle, and religious toleration is the thing they have come south to prevent. Denzil Hollis, one of the 5 members, veteran of every parliamentary crisis since 1629, a man who has risked as much as anyone for the parliamentary cause, writes about Cromwell in his memoirs with a venom that has not quite cooled in the years between composition and publication. He calls him dangerous, ambitious, a man using religion as a cover for personal advancement, a man who talks about God while thinking about power. Hollis is not entirely wrong and not entirely right. The most honest answer, which nobody at the time has the distance to formulate, is that Cromwell is a man in whom religious conviction and political will have become so thoroughly intertwined that he himself cannot separate them, who genuinely believes that what God wants and what Oliver Cromwell wants are the same thing, not from self-deception, but from the complete integration of self into purpose that his personal darkness of the 1630s produced. He is not using religion as a cover. He is not cynically deploying faith as a political instrument. He simply cannot imagine that God wants anything he doesn't. This is more frightening than cynicism. Cynicism can be managed, corrupted, outmaneuvered, bought. A man with a price is a man with a handle. A man who believes his victories a divine confirmation of his righteousness has no price and no handle, and the only way to stop him is to beat him, which nobody in England in 1644 is yet capable of doing. The letter to Walton is not, in itself, the thing that makes Cromwell dangerous. He is already dangerous before he writes it. What the letter does is make the danger legible, exposes to anyone reading carefully the quality of conviction underneath the military competence, the absolute personal certainty that makes the combination lethal. Charles, reading the parliamentary dispatches in Oxford, presumably reads Cromwell's letters among them. He has been dealing for 15 years with men who opposed him on constitutional grounds, on religious grounds, on grounds of personal grievance or political ambition. He knows how to read those men. He knows their price, their vanity, their pressure points. He does not know how to read this one, a man who has found God in his own darkness and come out the other side with his conviction intact and his psychology rebuilt on its foundation, and who then wins battles and attributes the victories to the God he has personally tested. This man is not navigable by the instruments Charles has spent a reign developing. He will not negotiate from fear. He will not negotiate from greed. He will negotiate only from the position that God's will permits. And God's will, as Cromwell reads it, does not include the restoration of Charles I to unchecked authority. It does not, as it eventually turns out, include the restoration of Charles I at all. The letter to Walton is dated July 1643. The axe falls in January 1649. Between those two dates, 5.5 years of war, siege, negotiation, betrayal, second war, purge, and trial, the distance between the dangerous man in the letter and the inevitable conclusion on the scaffold is, in retrospect, shorter than it appeared to anyone living it. History rarely announces itself. It mostly writes letters about dead sons carefully and with feeling, in the particular tone of a man who already knows, though he cannot yet say, exactly where things are going.